welcome to the latest episode of the RegTech Roundup, the Canadian RegTech Association's podcast, available on all podcast platforms. I'm Rob Baldessari, and I'll be your host today. By way of background, I joined the board of the CRTA after stints as a fintech company managing director and senior advisor for fintech at the Mars Discovery District based in Toronto. For those that don't know the Canadian RegTech Association, we're a nonprofit organization focused on solving regulatory challenges through collaborative efforts between key RegTech stakeholders, namely regulated entities, technology vendors, and regulatory bodies. Today, we're joined by Charles Gregory, Head of Surveillance and Financial Crime at Data Intellect. In this conversation, we explore the intersection of technological advancements and regulatory oversight, and we discuss how to balance innovation with the need for ethical standards. We delve into the challenges of preventing emerging technologies from facilitating market manipulation or unethical behavior, while also examining the crucial role of regulators, investors, and tech firms in mitigating risks like greenwashing, insider trading, and market manipulation. Ultimately, our conversation centers around how we can harness the power of technology without compromising market fairness, transparency, and integrity. Charles discusses various aspects of market conduct, and he weighs in on what he considers a must-have in order to achieve fair treatment for investors. Please listen in to learn more. Hello, I'm Rob Baldessari with the CRTA, the Canadian RegTech Association, and I'm joined today by Charles Gregory, Head of Surveillance and Financial Crime with Data Intellect. And Charles is joining us from the UK today. Welcome, Charles. Thanks very much. Perhaps you could tell us a little about Data Intellect and what it is that you do there.
Hi, Rob. Thank you very much for having me. I'll just introduce myself a little bit and Data Intellect. Data Intellect is a consulting business primarily, but what we do is we design and deliver system solutions. So we're very much a technology and data oriented business. We deal with a lot of kind of big data challenges. Our customer base at the moment is heavily in the kind of capital market space. So we typically deal with a lot of their big data challenges. My role, as you rightly sort of pointed out, I'm head of surveillance and financial crime. I'm an expert in the surveillance of a range of kind of market conduct issues. So I've been working in that space for a long time. I've dealt with market abuse, unauthorized trading, money laundering, sort of a whole range of things, but all of it in and around the kind of capital market space. So with that kind of slant on it, spent sort of the first 10 years of my career in the industry, mainly with UBS, and then sort of last 10 years or so kind of on the consulting and vendor side, delivering solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about market conduct today. And, when I think back about how the trading environment has evolved over the years, monitoring market conduct seems like it's been presented with more and more challenges. So perhaps we might start off by talking about how, the increased use of algorithmic and high frequency trading might impact market integrity from your point of view, and what safeguards should be in place to prevent manipulation.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure, and I think really what we're talking about here is automated trading. That's really what both those things fall under, and gives us a kind of a shorthand for it. Someone's built something, coded something, an algorithm or something enables them to trade in those kind of high frequency kind of increments, and potentially is just sort of switched it on and monitoring it and seeing how it behaves. So there's not necessarily much human interaction happening there. And it does tend to sort of increase people's kind of concerns, I guess, from a perspective of, well, what are the risks around that? And there are a lot of scare stories that come out in the press and hit the front pages of the financial press from time to time, like the flash crash. And then, we've seen a few of those over the years. So there are legitimate concerns about the market integrity, and I think it's fair to say, these automated trading kind of capabilities, there's positives to them. They are a double-edged sword. There's they add liquidity, they help investors to a lot of the time to optimize the price at which they can buy and sell in the markets. So I think everyone would agree those are good things. But yeah, there's definitely a double-edged sword that um, there are downsides as well. And you've kind of, there's weapons in the hands there of the people who control those automated trading facilities, those kind of trader developers, as it were, quants, as well that are concerning. Um, and I think the sort of the main kind of market integrity issues that I've seen relate to a kind of like how retail investors access the markets and the kind of how much of a fair level playing field there is for them to interact with it. And there are that's definitely where the public concern kind of comes in, and um, and I think legitimately so. I think by and large there are some quite good rules and controls in place for those things already, but there's more that can be done. So it's these kind of rules like the best execution and Reg NMS and so on that really look at kind of, well, are you giving people fair treatment? So in this opaque world of automated trading, um, when someone goes to buy or sell in the markets is a kind of a retail investor, but it does impact other investors as well. Are you getting a good price? Are you getting treated fairly? So there's quite an extensive set of rules around that now that most jurisdictions have. And most firms that we go to, when I speak to trading firms, everyone does have controls in place for this now. It's debatable how good some of them are, but certainly automated controls that are really comparing those trades you've executed for retail investors, for your customers, comparing that to fair price in the market and understanding what was the best achievable price in the market. These sort of controls have become the norm, and I see more and more investment in that. And that's certainly, I think a sort of a must-have. I think the other side of the equation is really the market integrity is the actual integrity of the market and the venue itself, and that's where, in a way, I think there's still more risk that perhaps hasn't been fully understood around this kind of automated trading. So it's behaviors like kind of quote stuffing is the kind of classic where a rogue algorithm sort of executing a lot of pushing out a lot of orders into the market very rapidly, perhaps at very odd price points, could
Mm-hmm.
really disrupt, the kind of the actual order book in a venue. Maybe even sort of, in theory, you can almost like slow the venue down as well if you just push in so many orders. I think this is an area where maybe there's still a bit of work to be done. I do see firms, and we've helped some in this regard, building controls for that. And often you need something a bit more like a kind of a real time kind of kill switch style control. If you've got a rogue algorithm that can fire, hundreds of orders a second, maybe even thousands, it can do a lot of damage quite quickly. If it's doing something wrong, you
Right.
need to be able to intervene quite quickly and stop that, turn that thing off and understand what's going on. And certainly, the exchanges and the venues, you would expect to have those controls, but also some of the trading firms as well, so that they can stop themselves from disrupting the market.
So
Um,
just to clarify, the order stuffing that you're describing are not necessarily orders that get executed. These are just stuffing the order book with different orders. Is that how I should
Yes,
understand
so
that?
there are orders to trade, but they may well, a lot of them, not be ones that are going to get anywhere near being executed because
Right.
there's no one who's going to take the other side of that.
Mhm.
But just in theory, you can sort of overload the venue, and create very sort of volatile and abnormal price movements if a lot of orders are coming in at very strange price levels. That can happen as well.
Right.
Um, but in theory, if everyone's done their homework correctly and tested their algorithms and their automated trading code before it goes into a kind of a live environment, it shouldn't happen. But I think there are sort of concerns the regulators are starting to explore about, well, how do you really validate those and really make sure that they're kind of prepared for all eventualities? And I think that's part of the flash crash,
Mm.
was almost like the unpredictable ways and perhaps that some of these automated trading algorithms could respond to certain events, and to each other, that could create some quite volatile price movements.
Right.
And I do think that there is, there's still more that can be done there to kind of ensure that people are properly thinking this through, especially as the world gets more volatile politically at the moment. If you've got a if you're hooking up your automated trading to signals like news events, for example, which is not an abnormal thing to do. You're creating a link between that automated trading algorithm and sort of news events, for example, as one of the inputs. You could create quite a volatile situation there.
Hmm. Hmm. And that could be created even without, malice or intent to do damage, right? It could be an unintended consequence, I presume.
Absolutely, and I do think it can be. There could be malice, but I think
Mhm.
much more likely to be unintended consequences. And how do you test how your algorithm is going to behave in all possible scenarios? I'm not convinced that that's an easy question to answer and to sort of
Mhm.
think of all the things that might prompt it to do something a bit odd. Um, so it is really important that people sort of extensively back test these in different scenarios and on different data sets to check for this.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Sort of brings me to another sort of complex and technology-based issue, and that's AI. So, what role should AI and machine learning play, even on the surveillance and enforcement side of the market conduct rules? And how do we balance innovation with ethical oversight, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting space at the moment. Very active. I think there's definitely a role for AI and machine learning. They overlap a little bit in terms of how we speak to them, though they are distinct things. Um, I think, but I think also neither of them are a silver bullet for these challenges. So I see a lot of AI adoption in the surveillance and the compliance world for trying to monitor for kind of misconduct. More at the end of how to investigate. So I see it as your AI agent that can help you to investigate alerts, that can help you to um, investigate something that perhaps a rules-based system has already found for you. So it's more in that at that end of the problem that you've already got some monitoring in place, but you want to build a case and investigate it. There is really a sort of an area where AI, in the current state of AI, in terms of what's possible, is really being adopted quite rapidly and can add a lot of value. So to give a tangible example, it might be um, an AI that helps you to generate a case write up. Helps you prompt a little bit about kind of how you're going to explain what happened. Can look at the data that you're looking at, help you with that, or can help find other information of use from other data sets, or even looking out into the public domain when you're looking at a particular entity. So some of that's very tangible AI capability that's here right now. So it's kind of integrating that into your workflows as a surveillance or a monitoring team. That's here and now. Um, Questions about data security and information sort of confidentiality there for sure, and firms need to be really careful about that. But I think the technical capability that AI offers there is quite compelling. um, where I think it's not a silver bullet is in the idea that you could sort of somehow do away with a lot of the sort of current monitoring systems and just completely replace it with AI. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, because in the world of sort of scanning markets data for misconduct, it's just not something that AI can really help with. Not well. When I say it cannot replace it. It can help. There
Mm.
are sort of ways it can start to chip away at the problem with again, just sort of prompting analysts a little bit to just help them find what's interesting, but it can't really replace those tools at the moment. And I think we're still a long way off that world. Um, so I do think, yeah, I think there's a growing area of sort of AI compliance and AI advisory work that I see kind of consultancies offering to help businesses kind of adopt AI and deal with these kind of information security challenges and kind of concerns around it, and just understand the right way to use it as well. There's so many AI tools out there as well. It's quite sort of dizzying trying to work out what you should or shouldn't be using and how to use it. And I I feel like we're on the cusp of probably some quite significant corporate AI misuse cases, as in corporate wrongdoing type cases of people adopting AI in the wrong way. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out, because um, I think we're also seeing the blurring of the lines around what's normally seen as kind of data confidentiality around this as well, like the AI hype or the AI evangelists want to push us, I think, to be very free and easy with our data. But when you're trying to sort of scan for misconduct and investigate misconduct as a surveillance team or a regulator, inside a bank or some other body, you've still got to sort of police that boundary really closely and really tightly that you're not leaking information or using information you shouldn't be using. And I don't know how well the AI world is really set up to help you police that boundary at the moment. And I think the jury's still out about whether that's going to happen without there being a lot of fines or yeah, sort of cases of wrongdoing around the handling of people's data.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, and it does certainly pose some potential challenges and risks. But on the other hand, I suppose it also does offer some potential relief against a growing compliance workload that would have a financial institution have 90% of its people working in compliance at some point. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think that's very welcome. And much as I love and think the world of compliance and surveillance is really important. I also appreciate that there's money that needs to be made, and we really do not want this to be a crippling burden on these businesses. We want this to be
right.
easy, pain-free as much as it can be, and I really do welcome this. And I want, I think there's a dream of the sort of um, the very small compliance and surveillance team that can, have absolute top of the world tooling at its disposal, find the wrongdoing that it needs, get their job done, and then move on to the next thing each day. That's still what drives me as well. When I think about what I'm aiming for as a solutions provider as well, is how do we get to that world,
Mhm.
and how do we enable that? And I think AI is exciting. There are real ways in which this can help people along. I would really I think there's more that could be done there as well in terms of kind of industry working groups. The regulatory bodies could foster this kind of innovation because that's where people are worried, isn't it? Am I going to get in trouble with the regulator for using these tools? So you
Right.
want that safe umbrella of a regulatory body that can kind of help, um, you know, just create a safe space to explore and work out what is and is not permissible.
Right, right. And like you were saying, you also want to make sure that you don't sort of violate one regulator while satisfying the requirements of another regulator. So for things like privacy and things like that come up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And ways in which I think there's because there's a two-sided thing with the AIs. There's one is I might accidentally leak information into the
Right.
public sphere, right, by engaging with AI, putting things in as a prompt as part of the questions I ask it, or giving it access to certain data sets, and it then sort of somehow, how watertight is it? But two, am I actually using information I shouldn't be using? I
Right.
don't really, if you don't know what that AI has been trained on, there could be all sorts of stuff that might, all sorts of rogue data sets,
Hmm.
leaked information, all sorts of things that actually you sort of might inadvertently be giving yourselves risks that way. So
Hmm.
um, that would almost be the one that I think is the most opaque about some of the AI tools that we're
Hmm.
being given access to now. That I think could be exposing us to um, to risks
Hmm.
um, that are ethical as well as information security based.
Yeah, interesting. Quite a potential minefield out there.
Yeah. So
Um, Now, your firm deals with lots of different data, data of different types, and I wanted to ask you about alternative data and with the growing use of alternative data, and that could be anything from social media sentiment, could be satellite imagery, stuff that's not traditionally, financial data historically. In that context, in that environment, what do you think constitutes insider information, and how should market participants navigate this sort of gray area?
yeah, it's a it is still evolving in a direction that I think means that it is becoming perhaps more difficult to define that boundary between what is and is not insider information, or at least we're creating a world where perhaps it needs to be redefined because we tend to think of it in very traditional terms as sort of information pertaining to um, uh, for example, a company's performance, something that it might make a regulatory news announcement on to do with its financial results or a merger or an acquisition. These are kind of the very traditional data sets that move prices and which are pieces of information that should be treated very carefully. And we look for those in our sort of in monitoring of and policies are written about very much pointing these out as examples. But as you sort of alluded to with alternative data sets now being used extensively, by firms that trade, and alternative data sets can therefore move prices. Weather data could now be something that moves prices um, as it impacts crops that have futures associated with them, things like that. So you wouldn't, I don't think you would say that there's insider information that you can leak about that, but certainly there are timing differences,
Mhm.
between one source of that data
Right.
that there's definitely scope for corruption there for sure, and there's scope as well certainly for retail investors and other participants in the markets to be very disadvantaged if they don't have access to this information. So I do think there's a bit of a rethink that's kind of potentially needs to come around that. And then social media is probably even more of a case in point because of the way that the news cycle about government actions, about company actions, is no longer happening through the traditional channels. It's happening on social media, and trading is happening in real time in response to those things. And it's really hard to know what the sources of people's information is. So if someone in a forum on Reddit or some other social media site starts talking about something, you're trading off the back of that because you see a sentiment direction. Well, are you trading on insider information? Now you may be as a trading firm, you may be um, just responding to a public signal in a way. It's sort of public information by the point it's hit social media. But as a regulatory body, I'm not going to be very happy about that. And the ethics around that are dubious, especially again, given the volatility that we see in the markets. And volatility has kind of become this almost like much more of a normalized phenomenon in recent months because of this, and recent years, in fact, because of the amount of sort of trading that happens off the back of social media. So whilst I don't think there's a case to say that we're getting the policing of that line wrong, in terms of how the law is currently and the legislation, the regulations currently framed, I perhaps feel that there's perhaps a rethink required of to in the interests of fair trading, of sort of market integrity, to perhaps look a bit more almost like redrawing some of those boundaries to encourage people to look more, with much more scrutiny and rigor at sort of whether they use that information to trade and what is permissible about using that sort of information to trade. Because I'm not sure it's in, given some of the cases we've seen like GameStop or even some of the volatility around, the US government's kind of trade policies and tariffs and so on. The volatility there was very extreme. The market prices moved in incredibly
Mhm.
rapidly, to an extent we've never seen before. And it feels like perhaps there's really scope for misconduct around that,
Right.
as well. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and clearer guidelines given to trading firms around what is and is not permissible.
It sounds like we all have our work cut out for ourselves.
Yeah.
The regulators, the folks like you that help companies deal with the regulations, and investors in general. But pretty fascinating stuff. Charles, I want to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.